Good afternoon. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this event for inviting me again. And for the honor of having the opportunity to close this magnificent event. I'm aware of the beginnings, the initial work of phenomenal Esteban. So I congratulate you because it is a place where economists feel at ease. So thank you for such a task and know your team and know your people. I mean, I still remember my other life. Basically, when Esteban called me and told me what he wanted to discuss in this Congress, the truth is that it seemed super attractive to me and I said, I won't miss it. And indeed, it seemed very interesting to me to describe what the transition economy is. Stabilization, reforms, and growth. In order not to make the long talk, I'm going to refer to two other talks that I had this week. The three talks make sense and are part of a package, so to speak. In the talk on Monday at Fundación Libertad, the idea was to explain that liberalism works. Basically, what we did was to put the results in a historical perspective. I mean, that makes you aware of what is happening, and there is a phrase that I like a lot. That is often used by the best Minister of Economy in history, Toto Caputo. When they tell him, well, I've already seen this. No, you've never seen it. This never happened in 123 years. Unless you're over 120 years old, you probably haven't seen it. So what that talk did was to put the achievements of this management, but with their historical perspective. I mean, the grassroots order, and that allows us to see the tremendous achievements that we are having. And also to show that there has never been so much discrepancy between the real data and the barbarities that the media say. I mean, I've never seen it in my life. I understand that they don't like me, but I could even take it if they didn't like me. But what I'm going to do is at least first the data. I mean, it would be healthy to be able to discuss the data on the table and not have to be enduring all the time lies, slander, insults, and so on. But the important thing about that presentation is that the achievements and positions in historical perspective are clear. You can see the size of the achievements, the reason why we received international recognition. But as the phrase goes, no one is a prophet on their land, so we don't care much about their historical legacy. Yesterday's talk in the Liberty Palace, although it had an academic format and we studied and discussed as an academic subject. But what we did was talk about probably one of the most important authors in economics, which is Keynes. But it's not that we only talk about Keynes, we actually talk about a particular work by Keynes. which is the general theory of occupation, interest, and money. This is not trivial. Keynes is a very complex author. His complete works of 30 volumes. I confess I didn't read the 30 volumes. I read a lot of Keynes books, but I didn't read the 30 volumes. What I did, I studied the general theory intensively. And the feeling I have is that many times Keynes is referred to the general theory, which from my point of view is a literally sinister book. So basically, the economic theory is bad, and not only that, but the summary, let's say chapter 24 of the general theory. Basically, what he is proposing as a system is the economic system of the Nazis and the economic system of the fascists. In addition, this was also marked within a debate, which was the debate on socialism, which is called the controversy over socialism. And it is a complementary position that Oscar Lange had, which said that socialism had to have all the control of the means of production. And that basically consumers determined their expenses as they wanted, and that prevented them from the problem of economic calculation. And the complementary vision that Keynes proposes, which was basically what the Nazis did and what the fascists actually did. They controlled everything from the side of the demand, and the means of production were left to the private sector. But they were less managerial because they told them what to produce, how to produce, how much. Therefore, they were all variants of that debate, and therefore those who come and talk and propose to return to Keynes. About Keynes, let's do Keynes, and I don't know what Keynes. Let's be clear that it is the microeconomy or the economy of a totalitarian system. That is, let's be clear about that, but it is not that I say it. Keynes himself says it at the end of the work. So one has to be very careful. I take the issue of when I read a book quite seriously, especially if it is a classic. So the reflection of the second talk was Keynes' nerve, that is, we adhere to other ideas, we adhere to the ideas of freedom. Which is also good to have clear what we say when we talk about the ideas of freedom. If we, in fact, I did it in the first cabinet meeting, and it is putting the frame, liberalism is the respect and restrict of the project of life of the neighbor. Based on the principle of non-aggression and in defense of the right to life, to freedom and to property. So if one truly wants to see how this works, because I also love it because I find many people talking about liberalism and not liberal. With which it is difficult for someone who understands what the ideas of freedom are to have other ideas. That is, this is like, I don't see people going from Miami to Cuba. I see people going from Cuba to Miami, risking their lives. This is the same. The reality is that when you start reading the liberal authors, it is a path of going. That is why there are so many socialists who came from this side and none of ours left that side. In fact, one of our greatest exponents here was a socialist until he studied with Mises. So when you take an action, you say, what does it affect? How does it affect freedom and what does it affect property rights?
camino de ida. Por eso hay tantos socialistas que se vinieron de este lado y ninguno de los nuestros se fue de aquel lado. De hecho, uno de nuestros
And you also have to be careful with what is the principle of non-aggression. That is, sometimes I find, no, my Lord told me such a thing, and I say, and the question is, what did he say before? I would say, no, as a concept. I say, for her certificates. Apart from that, if I tell you anything, it doesn't affect your life, your freedom, or your property. And he can tell me exactly the same thing, and I can also answer. I say that it is part of life and it does not affect any of the natural rights. I say so, I'm not going to adapt the psychopath, neither of the Keynes nor of the lying journalists. Apart from that, this talk, what I'm going to finish on this last despicable group, in 95%. Is that they talk about my answers and they say a lot of lies, slanders, insults, and all kinds of barbarities that they said about me, about my family, about my four-legged children, that said, by the way, Happy Animal Day. There are many who are two-legged, so let's say, except that they are part of the mineral kingdom or the vegetable kingdom, we are all animals too. God is incredible because the human being is so arrogant that it is believed that he is in another category. And they have said all kinds of barbarity about me. I say they have accused me of incestuous, of syphilitic, of pedophile, of all kinds of things. Therefore, I think I have the right to defend myself. Or the principle of inaggression. What do you think it is? You can answer. It is not that the journalist can hit and say any lie and you have to endure it. And that does not affect freedom of expression. And if you think there is a question of asymmetry, what does I exercise violence on? None. So, I say, because of these crybabies who are crying all day, and if the asymmetry means that then they exercise direct asymmetry when I was not in charge. So it is quite interesting how we look at the city of freedom. Having said this, today's talk, which is the third element, has to do with growth. And that is why I like the topic so much of what is transition. Because transition also requires us to understand what we mean by transition. Because if we do not give meaning to the word, it seems to me that we will not agree on times. And I also want to clarify this because my feeling is that the vast majority of Argentine professionals that is, economists are usually quite rude in dynamic terms. So that's why I want to spend some time or invest some time. Depending on how you want to define it, in what we mean by transition. If you are going to be talking about macroeconomics, that is, short-term economies, as it may be any macro model that you have seen, conventional, of those who study regularly, be it the model of added supply and demand, with its part of the goods and money market, known as some. If you want to talk about the Pasikin model or whatever you want, those models are static models. That is, the concept of transition has to do with the concept of stability. That is, you have a point of balance, and it is how you go towards that point. That is, it is a concept of stability. It is a concept of if you take out certain. That is, it is a concept of stability. It is a concept of if you take out the economy from that point, how it returns. Therefore, when one talks about transition and is with a macro model, which is a short-term model, it has to do with this matter of cohesion and the search for that balance. Now it is very different of what is discussed is a long-term issue. And in fact, the title, that's why it was so attractive to me, is that it has to do with growth. So we're discussing the long term. It is a long-term problem. Now then, how is transition defined? Well, it depends on the type of model we have in mind. So you have, I'm going to do it very roughly, two families of models. They have models where the stationary state is fixed. No matter what a growth model is, the stationary state is fixed. Example, the model of Solow is a model that has the stationary state fixed. Why? Because it tends to a capital stock per capita. And that capital stock per capita determines the product per capita. That is, if they take the economy in the aggregate, it moves to the growth rate of the population. But apart from that, the equilibrium defined in terms of capital stock per capita is a number that is fixed. So you have defined an initial condition and you have a stationary state condition. And the transition in this case would be what is called in the theory of growth convergence. So if the difference, for example, between the United States and Argentina was a question of capital stock per capita, Argentina is part of a smaller capital stock per capita, and it will converge to that capital stock per capita in a long time. If the characteristics are given that the saving per capita exceeds the need for investment, that the capital stock per capita holds, which is the sum of the amortization plus the growth of the population, that multiplied by the capital stock per capita. Then, as the saving exceeds that need for investment, the capital stock per capita increases and converges. So one should study the transition in that movement, which is what would come to be in that model. But then the reality is that the problem of that model of the Solow family type, we will see it again, has a problem that is not accompanied by empirical evidence. So there are models where they do not have a stationary state. That is, economies grow and grow indefinitely in principle. So basically what you have to look at is the dynamic transition. That is, the transition has another format. It is how they look at the problem. So it is not trivial how they are thinking about the problem of growth. That is, I am going to occupy myself with doing it explicitly as we think about the problems of growth. But what has to be clear is that if another economist has a different vision of how to build the stationary state or has a different vision of looking at it macro, it may be that we are all talking about totally different things. So the only thing I'm doing is saying what I understand by transition. That is, later you may like it, you may not like it. Later it may seem stupidity. I say whatever you want. I say it's like we look at the problem, it's another problem. So now it is interesting because it is true. We are going to be defining the type of model of growth. How we are thinking about these problems. But what we do have to agree on are the initial conditions. Because in short, what is a transition? It is a passage from one initial situation to another, right? That is a transition. And that has certain collateral effects. That is, it has, which is what I understand we want to discuss. But this is very important. What are the initial conditions? And that also seemed brilliant to me, the proposal made by Esteban, because we had a problem of initial conditions.
es cierto, vamos a estar definiendo
That is, Argentina clearly needed a stabilization program.
cómo estamos pensando estos problemas. Pero
That's why it seemed very good to me that the first word was
en
stabilization.
las condiciones iniciales.
That is, clearly the Argentine economy had a big problem.
Transición es el pasaje
The Argentine economy did not grow since 2011 onwards.
¿no? Eso es una transición. Y eso tiene
The GDP per capita in that path fell 13%,
que es lo que
or 15, I don't remember the exact number.
pero
In addition, when we took office, the inflation rate,
¿cuáles son las condiciones iniciales?
with 1.5% daily,
Pareció brillante el planteo que me hizo Esteban.
we have 4 monetary bases winning a day.
Nosotros
We had destined bases for 10 monetary bases winning in 30 days. We had the agreement of the fallen fund. We had negative net international reserves for $12 billion. When we have price controls, capital controls, a 200% gap, and when the rates only represent 20% of the cost, clearly the economy has a huge imbalance. In addition, the complaints of having issued 28 points of the GDP began to enter. We gave 13 in the last year. We gave capital control, a monetary surplus that was twice the amount of the one prior to the Rodriguez. Clearly, it was an economy about to explode. When, in fact, we sincerely, poverty jumped in the monthly frequency to 57%. So, in addition, 70% of the children were poor. And not only that, but also we had reached the turtle madness. That 30% of the former workers were poor. And that if that bomb exploded, clearly that would lead us to be Cuba with an intermediate stage in Venezuela. That was what there was. Clearly, the first thing we had to do was stabilize the economy. And I'm not going to be doing the whole story because I only did it on Monday. That inflation that, for example, the 1.5 daily plus all this explosion of monetary problems would have led us to inflation of 15,000, 17,000%. When they do the monetary computations today, 31, 33. I say, okay, they don't want to buy the counterfeit, they don't buy it. The inflation rate that the previous government delivered was 211. And with the trajectory that it was taking, it was going to reach 300. So the key was to cut with the monetary emission, which was a fiscal adjustment of 5 points on the Treasury and 10 on the central bank. And we also did all this while respecting the contract. I mean, I don't know, for example. Neither did we default, nor did we make up or an plan. Nor did we make reframing or anything. The debts were honored, the right to property was respected. I say, because that would have been easier to do. If you burst the assets, the asset holders, it would have been much easier. We decided a longer path by respecting the rights property. And we also did it without raising taxes. We did it by lowering taxes. Because we also lowered, we are the only government that lowered 2.5 points of the GDP in taxes. That is, between taxes that we eliminate or that we lower. We eliminate more and we lower 20 taxes. That is, they never saw that either. But apart from that, what is important for growth? The first thing is to have avoided hyperinflation, to have started a sustained decline in inflation. Despite the speculative attack that we suffered in the second part of last year. Why is that important? Because in reality, inflation is the same as the noise of communication in the price system. If I, at this moment, when I'm talking, I don't know from there, from here on the stage, over there, a mountain of noise appears, a wall of noise. I can be very good at explaining, and you are not going to understand basically why there is noise in the middle. Consequently, that is inflation. It distorts the functioning of the price system, and it does not allow a good allocation of resources, which is why it is fundamental to lower inflation so that the price system functions. And then there is an improvement in the allocation of resources. That is, now decisions that make more sense are made. But also, with inflation, there is a moral question, which is a robbery. And therefore, God knows it is necessary to exterminate it because it is wrong, because it is a robbery. The second non-minor issue is the issue of having shrunk the fiscal deficit. In fact, we eliminated in the first month. At 6 months, we finished with the fiscal quasar. And this is important in two lines. Because this means that the savings of the economy from the public sector increased. And the consequences are two. One is that all those funds that the state took and that it was making crowding out the private sector. That allows private credit to the non-financial private sector to be 3 or 4 points of the GDP. Today it is 12. It is still a radical number, without a doubt. But before there was not even that. That is, we are not going back. No one here is saying that we are in Switzerland. In other words, we actually want to be better than Switzerland, but let's take into account where we come from. Not only that with which that savings, now that it is going to finance the private sector. It can finance consumption, it can finance investment. That is one of the effects. And that clearly, if it impacts investment, clearly that is what is going to generate growth. The other thing that it can do, and that it actually does. The truth is that when we won the election, the country's risk was around 3,000 basis points. Today it is at 550. That makes the cost of capital opportunity go down. If the cost of capital opportunity goes down, the possibility of creating value increases. Because basically creating value essentially depends on the real return. Regarding the cost of opportunity. So if I'm lowering the cost of opportunity because I am lowering the country's risk, consequently the interest rate is lower, so the possibility of creating value is higher. That is, it is more in an economy that has consumed capital for 20 years. Roughly speaking, what would be the value of the marginal capital product? If you want to put it in financial terms, the ROIC, and if you want to go to automations, the ROE, you know that the ROA is not as accurate as the ROIC. It is better measured of return on capital. That is, when you look at the EBA in the background, the key driver of the EBA is the differential between the ROIC and the WACC. And that is what's applied by the assets or over the invested capital. Will give it what they are creating a value. Therefore, having lowered the country's risk, let's say they are lowering the WACC of the economy, and consequently that opens the possibility of during investment projects. Obviously, those who enter FES are going to capture high returns. Obviously, if it is an economy that has consumed capital. But not only that, but also this situation made that if we look at the GDP, the GDP gave me pre-Lemi this station since we arrived. It is 8% up, and when it corrects, what happened in February, which has to do with a loss of 3 days. That is, again, we are going to return to the historical maximums. Consequently, since this government arrived, making the biggest adjustment in the history of humanity, because we made 15 points of adjustment, that implied returning to the Argentines $100 billion. That is why it is also true that poverty fell to 28%. And we took 14 million people out of poverty. That is it. The adjustment is not recessive, nor does it generate poor. If the adjustment falls on the public sector, today the size of the public sector in terms of GDP is one of the lowest, or at least in this century, because it is at 15%. And if they corrected the prohibition disaster caused by the Presidium, then every day we would surely be competing with much lower levels. At historical levels, that is, we return to the Argentines $100 billion.
Está 8% arriba, y cuando corrija lo que pasó en febrero, que tiene que ver con, hubo una pérdida de días hábiles de 3 días, o sea, de vuelta vamos a volver a...
And obviously that is also seen in jobs. I know that journalists must have to admit that they have been lying all this time. The presentation on Monday should wake them up. That is, either they eat their stories or they are directly corrupt. But employment has also risen. It may be that they do not like the type of employment. That is, they shut down the registered ones, and the independent ones rose very strongly. Well, I say, that's why we passed the labor modernization law, which, by the way, during the return of democracy, nobody could get a labor modernization, and we did it. In other words, not only did we get labor modernization, we got deficit zero, we also got tax innocence. That is, Argentina, you were guilty in the face of the tax, until ye demonstrated the opposite. I don't know if they have any idea that today they are innocent. Until they can prove the opposite, they became free again. That is, it is an impressive shock of freedom. But not only that, we also took out the downfall of the age of imputability. We also took out the law of glaciers. We signed the agreement with the European Union. That is, thank goodness we like management. If we have more management and we had more legislators, I can assure you that I'm going to turn Argentina into the freest country in the world. Thank you.
Pero, digamos, el empleo también subió. Puede ser que no les guste el tipo de empleo. Es decir, cayeron, digamos, los registrados.
Both which, there, we have the associated effects.
Bueno, digo, para algo mandamos la ley de modernización laboral.
The positive effects of destabilization, lowering inflation, which takes away the distortion of the price system and better assigns the economy, an increase in savings, which generates more consumption and more investment by the private sector, a fall in the country's risk, which makes it more feasible for there to be investments. If those are the effects of destabilization, that is, destabilization is a crucial element to be able to start growing. So we have just defined the initial conditions. Well, now we have to see where we want to go. So we also have to think about which family of models we are going to be looking at. Remember that I told you that there were two model families. There was a family that had a fixed stationary state in terms of GDP per capita and in terms of capital per capita stock. And there were others that didn't. So I mentioned that the standard model, the standard growth model, which is the Solow model. Basically, that model has some interesting things. And there's other things that don't. But the saddest and ugliest part of the Solow model, although it is something very nice, which is the description of convergence, although it doesn't specify how the question of convergence is. Because basically, you can fill the story. That is, how is it that suddenly he had a stock of capital per capita very low, and then you talk about returns, cost, opportunity, and then you get here. It's a little more complex. Believe me, it's a little more complex. But you can have an explanation. There is an explanation that I like a lot, which is the hypothesis of Hayek on the market, which is a process of discovery, and the difference between a country that is already developed in front of someone who is on the way to do it is that they basically discovered many more products and they have more products. In fact, the characteristic, if you look at the American economy, they have many more products than us. This is a very interesting thing, because they have already invented them. The only thing we have to do is know how to copy. So if we copy, I say surely, we will be able to travel much faster and arrive faster than the United States, to be part of the United States. Therefore, that could justify the convergence. The problem with the Solow model is that, just as it developed in 1956, in parallel with Trevis 1, is that the following year Solow tested it in 1957. The problem is that when it tested the model only explained 15% of the growth. So the whole discussion of growth was to explain a residue. But it turns out that the residue was greater than the explanation in itself. That is, with which the model, to put it in some way, is very nice, it is very static, but it does not explain. In other words, it only explains 15%. To that, the answer came from the University of Chicago. There, in that case, basically, Stegel told him. But the problem is that you are not contemplating human capital. And from there came out two lines of research. The micro-investigation line, which is the whole theory of human capital, of Gary Becker, and the other line of research, which was the macro-investigation line, which had to do with growth, with Mises, who said, by the way, Mises was the thesis tutor, probably one of the greatest economists in Argentine history. He was Miguel Sidrowski. So basically, what Mises did was consider human capital and then now the work. You had capital and work. And the problem is that the growth was limited, basically, by the growth of the population. So when he put in human capital, he skipped that problem of the lemma of taking a population that grows at the constant rate, and consequently now, the function of neoclassical production, which is constant performance, that scale stops being a problem and can explain growth. Anyway, nobody gave a damn about the hypothesis. In other words, they worked more with the technological progress. The reality is that it was by the finger, with which that literature, with the course of time, it was the most important, with which that literature, with the course of time, was disappearing, and that literature reappeared, with someone who today is a Nobel Prize in Economics, with Paul Roma, who is teaching by Robert Lickers Jr., also a Nobel Prize in Economics, and he created the theory of endogenous growth. A whole debate began from 1983. From 1985 it became null, with the readings of Lionel Robbins, where basically Robert Lucas Jr. explains the endogenous growth models and talks about human capital, and a whole discussion begins, which ends in 1989 with a work by Mencure, David Roma, not Paul Roma, and David Weil, where they do an empirical testing of the model with human capital and explain 85%. That is to say that 70 percentage points of growth are explained, and they said, enough. The debate is over, it is human capital. The reality is that it is a little more complex, because I do it the other way around. Argentina, at the beginning of the 20th century, was one of the societies with the greatest planet formation. So how do we explain that this decadence, with which it is not only human capital, it also has to do with institutions. It has to do with how to generate growth. And what I'm going to do today is to work on more technological progress and the ideas of Schumpeter. That said, in fact, it has to do with those who won the Nobel Prize this year, with Thelpagin and Peter Hewitt, who are basically the ones who, in the entire debate on endogenous growth, made an interesting mathematical insight with dynamic optimization. They derived the models of creative destruction. It is very interesting to understand what creative destruction is, because that is also important to understand what transition is. That is, let's say, We have to understand that if we want to progress, that say, the transition and technological progress, that generates creative destruction. Let's understand, because if not, we are not talking about anything. Now, every focus on explaining the problem of growing performance. That is to say, what is growing performance? When you put in an amount, and it grows more than proportionally, and I am going to put it brutally, from the year 1800 until today, the population in the world multiplied by 10, and the GDP per capita by 15. That is, the product rose 150 times. That is, it grew more than proportionally than the population, and that is why the product raised per capita, that is their growing performance, in this area of growth, that is called the hockey stick. Say if we want to understand what happens, we have to see what is behind the hockey stick. While the face problem is that the neoclassical theory, as it is designed, with constant scale performance, does not work. It does not explain the problem. That is, we have a methodological apparatus to explain growth that does not work. In fact, I dedicated a book to that, which is called Capitalism, Socialism, and the Neoclassical Trap. So now, what is interesting about all this? This was already discovered by Adam Smith. That is, when he published the research on nature and the cause of the wealth of the nations, he had already discovered that it was the idea of the pin factory and how the division of work basically led to an increase more than proportional to productivity. And not only that, he had also made the description of how that transition was. He explained that there was a learning by doing, that is, in the measure that people did that task more, they learned to do it better. That is, he had already put the learning by doing. So you were at a certain point, and you began to have a growth in productivity, because you learned to do it better. Until at one point, a discrete leap appeared. That discrete leap is called technological progress. It is to produce the same thing with less work. Consequently, they have a leap. That is, the guy had seen them all. He had it super clear. And this is no less, because for the neoclassical theory, they go in yield, is an indicator of concentrated structures, and what they want to do is to go out and regulate everything. The best example is Europe. It is a region that does not grow. This is I am generating more problems, Pablo. I did not get enough with yesterday, and I continue. The second point is that it is also very important that Adam Smith raises it. He says the limit of the division of work is given by the size of the market. Therefore, if I open the economy to the size of the market, there are 8 million human beings. I go to look at 8,250 million human beings. That is what that does, is to enhance the division of work. But what does division of work mean? That is, if we are going to divide work among more people, it means that we are going to specialize in fewer things. Is that clear? That is, the one who best explains it is the teacher of Pablo. That is, when a person goes, graduates as a doctor, and is going to live in a small city in the countryside, and is going to be a generalist, and is not going to be dedicated to a very particular specialization. Why? Because it does not have a market. He still needs a market. Specialization is associated with a larger market. Specialization means that we are not going to do everything. We are not going to do some things, and we are going to do other things in which we are better and in which we are bad. We are not going to have a chance. Later, be careful in what we are bad at or what we are not bad at. Because I say, I'm going to do it like this, directly, putting a sector, the discussion in the textile sector. No, well, we cannot compete against China. China is one of the highest countries in the world, and yet it has a textile industry. How is that? They compete for design. I mean, again, the cars from Italy are much more expensive than the cars from the United States, for example. But what is the difference? Design. Design is something that people like. So basically, it is not that they cannot compete. They have to look for a way around it. And if they are going to be calling a State Department every time they do not like something, it is going to be difficult to compete. Therefore, let's say, it is also included in the subject of opening Saturday. After what I said, in empirical evidence, there is a fundamental role for human capital and, obviously, for economic freedom, that those countries that are more free are 12 times richer than the oppressed. In fact, they have 25 times less to put in the standard format, 50 in the extreme format, less rate, and the lowest in a distribution of the free country is better than 90% of the population of the oppressed country. Therefore, embracing the idea of freedom is like paying. Then there is also moral discussion, which I think is the most important. But if you want to think in terms of utilitarianism, embrace the idea of freedom, because, let's say, it is going to yield fruits. So I say, why are we daring to be able to grow? While the face point is the issue of growing yields. In other words, we have a ministry that never existed in Argentina, let's say, which is an invention of mine, that with the courses, with Feser Custos Nega, we call it Poetis Adentros, and we are clear that putting that name on it would have been very nerdy. So we created a ministry of deregulation. So the question is, well, what did they do? Well, we made more than 15,000 deregulations throughout the period that we have in the government. We are the most reformist government, not only in Argentine history, but in the history of humanity. No one ever did so much in such a short time, but we get to a rate of 70 regulations per day. I would almost say that if we sleep 7 hours, when we finish this talk, maybe we get 1 or 2 regulations. Do you realize? So, where do you see it? Look, it looks very easy. Argentina, for example, in the last year jumped 40 positions. In terms of economic freedom, we were in a hyper-pressed situation. We were with Venezuela and other almost unnameable situations. Well, today we are much better. Never has a country made such a great progress in such a short time, except for those countries that suffered a catastrophe, like a war or something, and had to be completely restructured, which allowed us to jump from those magnitudes. That is to say, if you look at the experience of lowering the public spending by 30 points, there are 5 experiences in history, but 4 have to do with getting out of the war. That is, the only ones who did it without getting out of a war were us. Imagine if we also added the adjustment of the central bank, the monstrosity that we did. And unlike all those who said that it was going to end in the Great Depression, now the economy grew almost 10%, when an economy that had been growing throughout the last century at 1% per year, we grew 10 in 2 years. We got 14 million people out of poverty. It seems to me that the manual to fee was banned, and they don't want to do it. Sometimes I understand that it is difficult to take the loss of capital. I want to share a personal experience. In 2014, if I am not mistaken, I bought a book. No, I bought the book later. I was with this issue. The growing yields were totally attacked, because the question was, how could it be that if the world, in the last 250 years, took 90% of the population out of poverty, if I take it with $1 a day, then that measure was adjusted so that you could say something else. But how can he say And if the hedgehog's face is a monopoly, the monopolies or the concentrated structure for the neoclassics are bad, something has to be wrong. It can't be that it's not improved. So many millions of human beings and their living conditions. How can it be that economic activity is bad? And then I read an article by Murray Newton Rothbard called Monopoly and Competition. And the reality is that after 3 hours of reading the article of 140 pages, which is a beauty, I said everything I've been teaching for more than 20 years. A market structure is wrong. What is that? I tip the loss of capital. My commitment is with the truth, not with, let's say, what I studied. And I have to defend it, because I don't know what. In fact, look, I'm going to tell you, from my point of view, what is the greatest virtue that Toto has as Minister of Economy. I have spoken to him. First, let's take into account that the amount we have, 2/3, was financial, so I needed someone who had a lot of finances. But the most wonderful thing that Toto has as Minister of Economy is his experience managing trading tables. He can't fall in love with any stupid theory, with any analyst, because if he lost money, they would fire him. That's why he worked in the best institutions in the world. He worked in Chet and Morgan. He worked at Deutsche Bank. And he worked for BlackRock. I mean, the guy is a giant. He doesn't make decisions. And he doesn't fall in love with any stupidity. If it works, he comes. And if it doesn't work, he shoots him in the head, he executes him. I mean, the guy is not wrong. I mean, that's brilliant. I mean, we don't have time or margin to make mistakes. There are 48 million people on the other side. I mean, here I don't care about the problem of derivative 25. I mean, it works or it doesn't work. If it doesn't work, it's to run away, and we go where it works. I mean, the Argentinians don't care about the sign of the derivative, in some way ex ante. I mean, what does this mean? That we are not going to fall in love with any model. We are only in love with data and doing things right. And that is a determining issue. We are working on releasing growing performance. I mean, every time Federco takes out a regulation, it releases growing performance and generates growth. The second part, which is not less, is what has to do with commercial opening. I mean, not only the agreement was the European Union, the ones we are advancing with the United States, with EFTA, and all the things with which Pavlov's going around the world. I concept of embassy that we have. The embassy of the United States in management as successful businessmen. I mean, for example, the embassy of Spain in management as successful businessmen. I mean, that's the concept. I mean, types generating businesses. We are thinking all the time about what business we can bring to Argentina. So it's not an opening to make stupid speeches in forums on an essay don't fix anything. No, they put us here to fix a problem. What do we do to fix a problem? The opening generates growth. Let's open. Argentina is the country, given its income, the most close country in the world. If Argentina had to have a commercial opening of 93%, the coefficient of opening is 30%. Guys, what kind of indiscriminate opening are we talking about? I mean, this is a strength, let's say, that no one can pass. I mean, well, that can't be, because Argentines pay with a lower quality of life. The other element is what we are doing in terms of tax policy. I mean, we low taxes, and if we keep doing the things we are doing, and the Argentines decide next year to renew the contract, yes. Well, in this government, we would be returning $500 billion to the Argentines, the same amount we received as that from the previous government. But not only that. Another thing we did is the REGI, because in the end, it's a tax incentive system, the REGI. What did they say? That it wasn't going to work. We already have $100 billion of REGI. I mean, not only did we return $100 billion to the Argentines, we are also getting $100 billion of REGI. We are also getting $100 billion. If we also add that we are going to export this year $100 billion, well, the triple is $100 billion. I mean, this economy, I told you when April 24th pass, is going to rise as a debt of use. And it's rising as a debt of use. And that's how we are going to become a power. And the other aspect, if we say that it had so much empirical weight, what are we doing in human capital? Well, in principle, the other great invention of mine in this government was the Human Capital Ministry. I mean, we stopped having social development. I don't know what other pathetic names they have before. It could also be called the Gary Becker Ministry, which is called Human Capital. It seemed to us that it was a little strong to call it the Gary Becker Ministry. But now, what is the important thing? It's the change of concept. Before, the assistance to the most vulnerable sectors was to give them the fish. I mean, in the end, it was slavery. Don't forget the phrase. Friedman said, there is no such thing as a free lunch. I mean, it's the free fish. The free fish. I mean, for those who want to know the origin, has to do with exit. Are the Jewish people of Egypt. I mean, the free fish was in Egypt. I mean, they were in exchange for the free fish. They were slaves. I mean, sometimes I'm surprised for the passion that some have for being slaves. Well, we decided to change that. We don't want the Argentinians to be slaves. We want free Argentinians. Then the logic of the policy of social contention changed. Today, what we give them are the tools to get out of that situation of vulnerability. We want them to learn to fish, and that, if possible, they have to learn everything they want, so to speak, in some way. So that's the important thing. We don't want Argentinians to be slaves. I understand that politics loves to have slaves, to have captive votes. I want free Argentinians. I want Argentina to be the freest country in the world, and that also implies to start breaking the shackles of those who are slaves of politics. The human capital system focuses on childhood and family. Why? Because that's the moment where the formation of the brain is generated. That's why health is so important. Because basically, if people either don't develop or don't have good health, they can't form at school. Not to mention all the improvements we are making at the level of education. And that had to be complemented with the labor market. And now it has two sides. Let's say that the kids who leave school can find work. And for that it is fundamental that the labor market has a more flexible structure. Because if not, only with the structure we had, well, in fact, the symptom of failure was that almost 50% of Argentinians were in the informal market. It is obvious that the previous model had failed, that also makes that those who have to enter don't enter. That's why unemployment was concentrated in the youngest, and that's where it's correcting. But not only that, there are people who have fallen from the system, and we work to reincorporate them. In fact, recently, we did the inauguration with Sandra of everything that is a center of training, and it's wonderful. Do you know who finances it? The companies, which is also in line with a theory of human capital, because when you are a company, you are going to train the workers in human capital, general or specific. They are going to give you specific training so that you can appropriate it. And you are there. The companies give people training. It's wonderful. And that model is replicable in all the provinces. So clearly, we are working on that too. That is to say that everything, that is the machinery of growth. We are putting it to work. We are committed to make Argentina great again, and we are going to do that with the hand of freedom. Now, I define the initial situation, and I define what we would like as a society, as we want, or what we think about how the path should be, let's say, to a prosperous country that, God forbid, it seems I am escaping the debate of transition, but as I say in my law, I don't kick the ass of the syringe, and I am going to answer now about transition. So now, we can define transition in two ways, or in two senses. It is a transition with the economy in a stationary state. That is an economy that does not change. Say what would happen in an economy that does not change. And let's say, what would we call transition? In that case, it would be a question of resource reassignment. It is neither more nor less than that. Let's see, every time we're deregulating, what happens? The relative prices are changing. If you have the relative prices changing, what results? That resource assignment is the same. I understand that many have not studied general balance, because it is like counterintuitive that relative prices change and that resource assignment does not change. It seems to me that the normal saying would be to understand that if relative prices change, resource assignment changes. What does it mean that resource assignment changes? That there are sectors that are going to be better and there are others that are going to be worse. That is what it means. That said, I am going to do it in a transitory shock. I mean, transitory shock is the pandemic. People are hyperscale. One of the mechanisms to fight it was to have Barbies. And men, there are some products that were allowed to demand and others that were allowed to demand a lot, which were the Barbies. That is to say, there was a change in the demand composition. Is that clear? I mean, there is no growth. Nothing, I mean, because apart from that, there was a freeze in that situation. Well, but there was a change in the demand composition. So, if there was a change in the demand composition, that led to an increase in the demand for Barbies. If the demand for other things fell, the logical thing is that the price of the Barbies goes up, and that the price of the other goods goes right, and let generate a signal to the system that says resources must be taken out from where people are not demanding that and take them to the other sector. I mean, it seems quite evident. Well, this is not a minor issue, because they did. He wanted to poke, said, no, but the price of the Barbies is going up. In such a difficult moment, let's regulate the price of the Barbies. By doing that, what does he do? He killed people, because if you let the price go up, the economy would have taken resources there, and they would have been a lot more Barbies. If there were more Barbies, fewer people would die. Therefore, that stupidity of wanting to control that price generated in human lives that were lost. In that case, let's say, putting yourself behind the economic analysis is expensive. It is almost not measurable, because it is not. And even though they end up in jail for a crime against humanity because they are not going to return the loved one they lost there. That is a case. That is only trans story. Another case, maybe that also, let's say, in this, but let's say it is permanent. I mean, that can be said. For example, a company links the tobacco, let's say, to wine, might say, because they are changing the habits of people. That is why I like example made by Salvador Di Stefano, which seemed brilliant to me. He says, well, now we are given to everyone for eating eggs. So we eat scrambled eggs. We eat eggs from I don't know what. Chicken eggs, let's say, hummus, or whatever, or we give eggs to everyone. Well, I say, except for an idiot. He does journalism, I say, because he should not. For well, as a psychologist, he said, no, well, but Americans are very stupid, and the way they eat. He is not the one who believes that I'm talking. I am not talking about television. I am talking about radio. I say, one more idiot. Still, for that, in a way, and much more death. So, I say, but they do not understand the nature of the example. I say, fake. He was great. Says, is socialists knew about economics. They would not be socialists. Or as Masi said, knowledge and economics leads to liberalism. So, well, that's why his death, might say, because that, I mean, and also being deaf, also has to deal with a whole series of horrible human issues that implies being envious, resentful. I say, at a death, I mean, basically a resentful guy. So, the central point here is that what Salvador was saying, he says, well, now you put eggs on everything. I say, the truth is that he doesn't see people who are combining eggs with jam. I mean, that change. When you are doing that, they made the products go bankrupt. And I say, well, the truth is that he doesn't see people who are combining eggs with jam. I mean, that change. When you are doing that, it breeds the jam producers. Now, nobody is complaining about jam producers, or it's like a person who says, well, these poor people who have the stars on one side and done anything, and suddenly they say, ah, look what I bought. Where did you buy it? From Mercado Libre, for Temu, for Gem. I say, that's the opposite. I mean, then, let's say, explain why, let's say, a person could have the buying more expensive for something, and it's false that you lose huge job. There's a beautiful book that I recommend, and that I clean. That's called Economics, One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. There's a chapter called The Salvation of Industry X. The reality is that if you are going to buy now new cheaper goods, eager a job that you can now dedicate to something else, then you're going to buy in another place. You're going to buy other things, and therefore, let's say, what you're going to have is a reassignment of the job factor. If you don't lose your job position, there can be relative intensity. Well, let's say there will be change in relative prices, but let's say SEA for that, then you need a flexible modern market. Well, as you are, let's say, all the time with technological progress, changing relative prices, you need flexible markets so that Production factors can move faster, and that's what you need to have more flexibility in the economy. That's what's going to, let's say, make the big difference. So, that's a point. Another point that has to do with the topics of creative destruction. That is also a minor issue, and that is you are a competitive company, let's say, and I suppose rethinking in the case perfectly competitive. Could there be technological progress there? No, there can't be technological progress because it means that you are taking resources from the company and you are putting them into research, development of new technologies. What is the problem? That then, let's say, in the times of the existing product, you would be having waste. That is, you would be earning less. Therefore, you would have to go bankrupt. You would only do all the investment process if in exchange for them he could get a quasi-rent. If he get a quasi-rent, then you want to say that you are going to have a monopoly. Therefore, as he called the monopolies with regulations, the result, what will it be? That you are going to fuel technological progress. You are going to kill, let's say, everything that has to do with research and development, because there would be no incentives. I say, T1 example, of course, it is Argentina. Argentina, let's say, broken down, attested to regulations, did not grow up easily. Now, it says that when you made an invention and you were left with the market and move to another, I say, there is someone who is breaking down and they have to, let's say, we consider. I mean, then you have to know that great technological progress is not an improvement for Asiana. Let's say, because she wins and loses another, the issue is that in the end, they all win. So, do not come to me with the stupidity that the Kika, psychopaths, and the morons, other journalism, say, no, well, but the economy grows unequal. Yes, it grows unequal. You have a huge technological progress. You have a huge relative price change. You have a huge liberation. Then there will be sectors that are going to contract. Now, when I look at the spread index, it is 75%. That is, of the 16 sectors, 12 grow. Then, if later they come and grab and do cherry picking and grab the 4 sectors that are going wrong, the one who's going wrong, cheese is the one who is going worse. And from there, they make the fallacy entirely on the part of taking the worst of everything, generalizing it. And well, I say, the problem is not the ignorance or the bad, but the trees. I say, it is a problem that is believed. So, these things, let's say, one has to understand that they are going to happen, let's say, and we should be happy because of what is happening in the mountain range, because of what is happening in mining, which has to do with the sim, which has to do with silver, which has to do with copper. The Chileans export $60,000 million, we 5,000. I say, they're cheating. There is something wrong if we did the same as the Chileans in the Andes mountain range. We would have amazing jobs. So I say, no, well, but I want to live. Well, let's say, the high salaries in Argentina, where they are paid, and Eugen, well, I say, what? I say, Eugen is also in Argentina. And so, let's say, we also have everything that is, let's say, oil and gas, right? We have everything that we can do in agribusiness. We have what has to do with the economy of knowledge, the possibilities we have of becoming, well, the relative prices would change. There will be resource reassignment. So the question is, if you want that we get third path, because if we start to attack the price system and punish the one here is doing well, say, subsidize the one here is doing poorly, the economy will be worse off, and we will all be worse off. So the question is, there, if you want, the answer to this is what we call morality as state policy. The first thing is, we are now going to enter the cynical field. In other words, that saying, that know him, a son of a bitch, just like the entire political caste. I mean, they could believe it, and it's fine. Let's say that after such a bad experience with politicians, I say, I think it's reasonable. A hypothesis, let's say, from the beginning, what would a guy who was looking at the votes after I say, I open, I generate competition. Why? Because they earn 48 million and lose, let's say, I mean, Don Cesarin, Camita, Dominica, I say, Camita, Dominica, charged, let's say, 4 times more expensive the tires than, let's say, for Don Cesarin, let's say, of the expensive tubes, let's say, charge the triple of the tubes, right? While they fought with the convicted, I say, then they paid 3 times more expensive. An interesting thing. Now, then, I look how much they own, how much they lose. I achieve political utilitarianism. Yes. No, I have to promote variety. I have to promote openness. I have to promote creative destruction. I say, I have to do that. Why? Because in terms of electoral calculation, it is convenient for me. But you can imagine that I can't betray my economist heart. I mean, it's part of my old life that I carry with me, and I don't think to get it out of me, I'm going to be an economist. So the question is that efficient? No, it's not efficient. Because as let's say, this is this higher price, I have to punish the one who is doing well. Then I'm affecting the relative prices. Then the resources, I have to go to the winning sector. Don't flow and dissect it. That has to go wrong or continue to go wrong, but it will. It will. It will also have to pay with taxes. For what? To subsidize it. For January, let's say, I will. Yes, it gave Troya. Okay, it was a problem to enter Troy because it was impossible to enter. But it gave Troy also fell. So in that concept, there is a huge loss of efficiency because in addition, someone has to finance it. That's when you say, no, well, whole sector. Well, the question is, how the hell are you going to solve it? No, well, to lower taxes. Well, we lower taxes. God, did this occur to you to ask a governor to lower taxes or to lower gross income or tax? Let's say the mayors, the low municipalities, and we go down. I mean, we also have to know who they have to ask for everything. Look, between February and Venezuela, under a lot of taxes, they have a lot of investments. So the model works. The provinces, that of Ricky, WACC, well, they can choose, let's say, to be the Soviet Union. Well, then they don't complain. I mean, art, it's a problem of what we choose. And here, we have to know who has the right to choose, right? So, now, I'm going to tell you something. Even so, given political utilitarianism and given economic deficiency, there is something that is more important, and it is what? In our case, it is what guides us. It is if that policy is fair. Sir, the question is, okay, I have to save sector X, and for that, then I'm going to blow up the head of taxes to sector Y, and then, let's say, I save sector X, because, God, it seems to me that we have to save it. I mean, then, not only do I lose economic efficiency, not only that, and then the truth is that sooner or later it will cost the votes. I mean, the question is, are you okay with doing that? I mean, how much are you in favor of the robbery? How much are you in favor of the unfair treatment against the law? So, that is the key. If a policy that you implement is unfair, let's say, that is going to have problems in society because they realize that they are unfair. They're going to hit negatively on efficiency, and in addition, they're going to go back in terms of political utilitarianism. So, when your ethics and morals are aligned with efficiency and are aligned with political utilitarianism, society is going to progress. When you worry about collecting votes, that is going to end up in your ass. I mean, social justice ends badly. Yes, social justice is magical in times of votes, because I have 5 types. One has 500, the others have 0. I give them 400, the one with 500. They are all less, and I distribute them equally, and there are no leaks. So they are all left with 100. You know what? I go to an election. I win. I win with 80%. Now, someone who is going to invest does not invest. Why? Because they say, no, because if I own money, then they're going to punish me, and they are going to get what I own. And let's say, if the one who is going to work says, no, I don't work, because basically, they are going to steal the fruit of my work, and they're going to give it to the one who works. So no one works, no one invests, no one does anything. Let's say, the economy collapses, but that policy falls above everything because it is unfair, and that is why we focus so much on morality as state policy. So, the transition that you are having, technological change, and you are having the release of growing performance, change in relative prices, there will be resource reassignment, there will be sectors that will be better, and there will be sectors that will be worse. The ones that will be worse, if they don't adapt, they will break. That is to say, the light bulb says no. If it doesn't fall, I'm going to the zoo. The light bulb says no, I'm going, and I'm fighting it, and it's going great. It would depend a lot, let's say, on the businessman. What is reality? It always depends on the businessman. That is to say, you look at grace, capital, work, technological progress, but without businessmen, there is nothing. The hero of this movie is the businessman, and we, as policymakers, we have to make policies that are fair. They throw me the balls on the floor, and they say, I want a meeting, and they say, in which sectors do we have to invest? I said, but you are stupid. I say, you are the businessman. You are the one who has to say where you are going to invest. What we have to do is level the field. We have to get rid of all the parasites in the middle, all the disorder, the tax disorder, the regulatory disorder, the monetary disorder, the exchange disorder. and level the field. Don't pick the winner. We don't choose winners. That is to say, they're going to have to get their entrepreneurial spirit, and this will be turned around by the businessman, the ones who create value, not the parasites that destroy value. That is why we take out the middle class and return freedom to the people. Don't expect us to tell them, we have to do this, we have to do that. Nay, now, everything that is not prohibited is allowed. I'm not like the other politicians. For you, let's say, everything is prohibited, except what I allow you. No, everything is allowed, as long as it is not prohibited. And it is clear what cannot be done. You cannot violate life, freedom, and property, and obviously everything is based on the principle of non-aggression that leads to economic efficiency, that leads to prosperity. So, look at what questions are being asked, because the question is to be stupid. It doesn't make sense. So, what do we do? What do we do? We protect. We already had an infant industry for 70, 80 years. And how was it not? We have an infant of 80 years. That is, we did not advance anything. And everything is like that. All those policies, they failed, all of them. None of them worked. Therefore, we understand that we are in a saturation of great technological progress, the exchange of relative prices, in great regulation, amidst the whole of the medium ones. The relative prices are going to change, and the resources are going to be reassigned. What we need is that there is as much flexibility as possible, so that the reassignment of resources is as fast as possible. If we accept this challenge, which is the challenge of change, we will be great again. If we don't have the balls to face change, we are going to become the shit that the regime took from us. May God bless you all. May the force of heaven be with us. Long life, freedom, cowardship. Thank you very much.